Well, welcome on in. My name's Key Points. What we are going to be doing today is going through Death's Door any%, no major glitches. We're going to go through my personal best in the category. I am going to be submitting this as part of a three-way race of the category with the third place and second place holders in the category, which is Uppercasserole and its TFT, respectively. This personal best is currently fourth place on the leaderboards of 35. I'm gonna double check that real quick. 35 submitted runs for the category, and this is fourth place. It was third place, but Upper recently got the bop on me. So this run is from about a month and a half ago. So pretty recent. I have been doing some longer form categories more recent than that, but have made a return recently, especially for this category, for this potential race. Yeah, without too much more, we're going to be jumping into it, just to kind of talk through the game. This is ending a previous run. Since getting my PB, I was running a couple different times. So starting the game here, talking about it a little bit, it is an action adventure game. Came out in mid 2021, so only a little bit over a year, and it's had a really fun community of speedrunners ever since it first came out. So very glad to be part of this group. Lots of really cool, lovely people I've been able to meet, and yeah, the point of the game that we'll be discovering here in a moment is we work for the this Hall of Doors. We are Reapers. Our little protagonist is part of this collective of Reapers who harvest souls from those passing on. The task we're being given to right now is to fight a giant soul. Before we meet the giant soul, however, we're going to see the first two tricks of the game. One I'll talk about a little bit later, called a fast door. The other one we'll talk about right now. Some walls don't have hit detection on our projectiles, so we're able to shoot an arrow through the first wall to hit that switch. It's going to let us skip the entire tutorial area and get right into the first fight. This is a giant soul. Certain creatures, if they don't die in the lore, their soul gets corrupted and enlarges, and they lose their sanity, and we need to deal with them. So, pretty quick work there to get rid of the demonic forest spirit. Um, what we utilize there is a mixture of the different attack patterns that we'll be using throughout the entire run. The game will teach us in a little bit what heavy attacks are. Usually, it only expects us to know what light attacks are at this point. And light attacks have a cooldown after 3 strikes. We kind of manipulate around that by doing a heavy attack followed by 2 light attacks, and then another heavy, and then continuing that pattern, because it means we can circumvent the cooldown that 3 light attacks has, and the heavy attack doing double damage as a light attack means that the combo gives 4 damage instead of 3 in about the same amount of time. So most combat scenarios, you'll see us, whenever we can, trying to use heavy light, or light heavy light, something like that, to maximize our damage. A couple things we're collecting here at the beginning of the run is a door. Those act kind of like save points. Also fast travel. We'll see those a lot more throughout the run. And then soul clusters, which souls are basically our currency of the game. Every time you defeat an enemy, a giant soul, or collect any of those soul clusters, you get soul. You can see a running tally down at the bottom right. And that's very important. We've routed it very specifically in order to reach certain upgrades later in the game that keep our combos roughly the same with enemies scaled throughout the game. What we've gone through first here is a couple mini arenas. Each arena had a gate that had a certain amount of locks on it. By defeating the enemies, we were able to open those gates to move on. This is the first of the major arenas of the game, and most of this game is dictated by, it's about 20 or so forced arenas like this. There's going to be at least 4 per dungeon that we'll be going to later, and a couple others spread throughout in pre-dungeon areas like this. So they're always going to be the same, so we'll know what each wave of enemies is going to be before we go into it, so we're able to strategize and come up with the quickest way to get through them like there, we'll manipulate enemy UI, those kinds of things in order to um, just set up the next waves for easier dealing with all of the enemies. We'll quickly say hello to Stedhon. He plays a bigger role in some of the longer categories, but in any percent, he's really just going to be there to talk a little bit. We'll skip through his dialogue for the most part. A big difference between the runners of the race is going to come down to the soul routing that we utilize in order to get upgrades. Early in the game, Uppercasserole is going to be skipping a lot of those soul clusters that you'll see me pick up, and because of that, not be getting as many upgrades as we do. So it is faster to skip a lot of the earlier soul clusters because they just take a lot of time. They're very much out of the way, um, which saves about 2 minutes over the normal run. It's pretty significant. However, because of lower strength, you then have to hit enemies more often. Combat becomes a little bit more difficult, so there's a trade-off there. So you lose about a minute in speed with optimized um, uh, arenas as they are. Um, However, we're slowly getting better at that, getting that number lower and lower. So eventually, low strength will most likely be the more optimal route. This is our second arena, and we're introduced to a new enemy type that you saw me make quick work of, the mages. It is paramount that we deal with them as quick as possible because it takes a long time for them to respawn. They shoot a projectile and then disappear. We don't want them to disappear because then we're left kind of waiting around for them to respawn. It's fairly arbitrary where they respawn after their first initial spawn, so you don't want to get stuck kind of waiting for them. With that being said, we're already out of that arena. It's actually one of the longer ones. It's quite a lot to deal with this early in the run. Speaking of a lot to deal with this early in the run, the second boss that we're going to see, mini boss really, is right here, the Guardian of the Door. Pretty big roadblock for a lot of runners, beginning and experienced. It's a pretty annoying boss, and we have a quick method of dealing with it, which is pretty difficult to actually work on. There's a strategy here, so we start with some early arrow shots, pump in some damage, and then we run behind it. Now, when the Guardian raises in the air like that, there's a wind effect that pushes you away. You can see it happening right now. We're abusing the fact that we're in the back of the arena so that we're not getting pushed by that wind and we get stuck behind the Guardian, so we can be damaging it instead of being pushed away. And like that, we're able to roll through its laser attack, not get it damaged, and make pretty darn quick work of it because of that. You'll see I'm using a lot of arrows early on in combat. Right now, arrows and light attacks with the sword do the same amount of damage, so they're fairly OP compared to what they will be later on. We do not upgrade magic at all in this run. We focus purely on strength upgrades, which affects our sword strength. It does not affect our arrow strength. Arrow is considered a magical ability in the game. That's a soul cluster that I'll pick up, TFT will pick up, but we'll see an early lead from Upper because Upper will be skipping that one, as well as a few very long ones in the next section of the game. This is our first big lore dump of the game. We're probably not going to touch too much on the story in the actual run itself. This is kind of game that I love to keep as unspoiled as possible. There's some really fun, quirky dialogue and things like that. This is a good time to bring up, though, that in a lot of speed games, language matters. Certain languages faster to scroll through and ends up being faster. In this game, the quickest language, which is simplified Chinese, saves about 7 text boxes throughout the entire run, which equates to something like half a second at best. So there really isn't any incentive to do any specific language because we haven't really optimized the run enough to make half a second matter. But that also means that that's a good and fun incentive we have for the category when we've run it in some recent marathons, which is basically what language to run it in. We have quite a few to choose from: French, German, Korean, Japanese, English, whatever. And that's definitely an option to see if we can get the language incentive as a donation incentive. We quickly saw a spider there. precursor to one of the most annoying enemies. We won't see them for another about 20 minutes, I'd say. But that's a nice taste of the pain to come. But first, we're going to go into the first major area. The Grey Crow told us our new task. The Grey Crow showed up earlier and bonked us on the head, took our giant soul, and fed it through that door. Now he's tasked us to go to each of the three major hubs of the world, to defeat a giant soul there and come back to him with the three of them. So now we're going to the first spot, to the west, which is the estate of the Urn Witch, where we're going to first get our first area gimmick, which is shooting arrows through fire pits, lighting the arrow on fire, and lighting these braziers. When these braziers are lit, they open up the next path, so it creates these fun angle puzzles. One thing the game really doesn't tell you is that you can dip your arrow into the fire and shoot it. You don't have to shoot through it. So we utilize that quite a lot here, where we're going to get some specific angles to skip parts of the puzzles. Another minor sort of glitch that we use here is we mess with the isometrics and we roll on top of that pot, and then we use the pot to roll on top of the hedge. That lets us get that soul early. That's a newer thing we added. Usually we actually just skip the section entirely utilizing that. It's called pothead skip because as we're walking on the hedge the second time, up in the top center you'll notice an NPC standing there with a pot for a head. That's Pothead. Very clever name. We skip him in 2 of his 3 cutscenes in this area by doing that roll over the hedge there, saving something about 20 seconds or so over doing it the vanilla way. So this is one of those forced areas where you'll see this gate has a certain amount of blocks. By destroying those specific 4 enemies, we can advance to the next area. Similar here, there's 2 of these grunts that we actually can ignore because of see, the mage disappeared there, so I had to wait for it to respawn. Thankfully I had other enemies to deal with. But yes, certain enemies we have to deal with in order to advance. Here there's just going to be a lever, so we can skip all of these enemies and just run right over here. Alright. What we're going to do, we're going to goad some of these enemies to follow us, because we're going to be using them for some mana harvesting. You'll notice below my HP that there's 4 white diagonal squares, or rectangles. Those serve as our magic. Arrows take up magic like I mentioned before. Same thing with some other abilities we'll be getting throughout the game. And hitting enemies and breakable things, like you'll see mushrooms throughout the entire estate, that replenishes our mana. So you'll notice we only have 1. Barely dodged that attack there. So what I'm going to do is use some of these enemies that I've been kind of having follow me around to... see, I messed up there a little bit by running out of mana and not having enough to light that other arrow. I'm shooting those at very specific angles to light those braziers from a distance. By skipping a lot of these fire pits and not lighting them, I'm skipping a lot of enemies that spawn when they are lit. So it also is saving time by shooting at those strange angles. And I can skip past this enemy, not required for anything, but you know, he can be helpful for getting some extra mana when necessary. But we only really need 1 blip of mana just for this specific pot. We'll fire an arrow out here, and that's basically going to be it for this area. You saw us go out of the way to collect 2 soul clusters. Those are 2 that Upper will be skipping during his run, so you don't have to worry about that. But we collect that, and that's going to be important here once we get inside. We're finally meeting Pothead for the first time, although he thinks we are a long-standing friend at this point before we go into the manor. So the estate's like a pre-dungeon area. Now that we've gone to the estate, we are now in the actual dungeon. But first we're going to make a pit stop. We're going to collect that door, which is a save point, but also brings us back to the Hall of Doors, which is the hub world of the game. So that door that we're running past there would bring us back to the Lost Cemetery, where the Grey Crow is. And first, we're going to talk to Darwin, our buddy here with 4 eyes. He's our shopkeep. We can trade souls for upgrades, and what we did there is upgrade to Strength 2 before going back into this door, back into Manor. Strength upgrades increase the damage done by your sword by 0.2. So with Strength 2, we now have 2, twice, so we have 1.4 damage for our sword. What that allows us to do is keep a lot of the damage breakpoints we're used to the same. Grunts in the manor have more health, and some of the other enemies that we'll be running into that are stronger enemies have similar health pools with these upgrades, so we can rely on 9 to 10 hits beating the larger enemies, while 3 hits beating the most common enemy, grunts. Mages and archers always will keep the same health unless there's stronger versions of them that we'll be running into. So, the manor has these fun pot puzzles where there's these specific teal and yellow colored key pots. No relation. Our goal is to break the certain amount that correspond with the door, usually 4, in order to open up the path to the next area. We'll continue using fire and arrows to skip into new areas. Here, we're actually going to use the mouse. We usually use controller for most things, but mouse is very helpful for certain angles like that. We can shoot fire through a tight space in order to light the cobweb on fire sooner. Like I mentioned before, there are very strong enemies in each area. This one is the Grimace Knight. We made pretty quick short work with him because he had a very kind pattern, jumping back and shooting a projectile at us. So we made quick work, but he's not the last one we're going to see. But every area is going to have stronger enemies like that usually have about 3 times as much HP as the grunts. And that's going to get us our first of the Crow Souls. So the Crow Souls are necessary for advancing in the dungeon. There are going to be 4 per dungeon, and each one lights up a fourth of that big giant door, scary door. And so our main goal for each of the dungeons is going to be get those 4 souls as quick as possible. And each time we're going to have to deal with, for most of them, difficult arenas. Not all the time is there an arena, but most of the time there's an arena like that before. Funny enough, we're actually going up to a Crow Soul right now that does not do that. But it is protected by an extremely annoying area and a mini-boss, one who we're coming up to actually right now. We affectionately call this one the Waltz Boss, the Waltz Pot, because there's a cute little waltz that plays while you fight him. The strat that we're using here to finish him up real quick is a combination strat by both Vareem, the world record holder, and Pudding Boxes, who's been an on-again, off-again world record holder for the glitch categories. Makes pretty short work of a usually very annoying boss by abusing the iframes we get from rolls and how long its attack lasts. In this room, we call it the Imp Loft. It is the biggest source of RNG in the game, and it has killed many runs because it's a dark room. The imps spawn where they want and move where they want, and you have to shoot these hard angles with the fire arrows in order to move throughout the room without getting hit by the imps, who have a nasty habit of hitting you through walls, and without losing mana by missing shots and that kind of a thing. So it can be a source of a lot of time loss. Thankfully in this one it is not. I golded that because it was a very clean imp loft. It usually is not. And what we're going to do at the end, we don't really need to, but we're going to beat up some of these imps to gather some extra soul. Not the next upgrade, but the upgrade afterwards has a very, very short leash for soul count. So any extra soul we can get throughout it by just slashing some enemies in the way, slight time loss, but it's better than being a couple souls short of an upgrade we need later. So with that, we're moving on to our third of the Crow Souls. And this is a good time to mention that there's going to be downtime between each of these sections, sometimes pretty large. That is really good for talking about a few different donations, or reading out some donations that came in, those kinds of things like that. So this game has plenty of opportunity for that. Coming into our second Lickitung fight, at least that's what we like to call them. It's, I think, a better name than Grimace Knights. These get a little more difficult because now what they've done is add in extra enemy spawns that we have to deal with. Before the Grimace Knight, the Lickitung, dies, they will spawn continuously, the 2 mini grunts. So we deal with the larger mob first and then handle the adds afterwards. If we can. Sometimes you really do have to clear out the grunts because the combo you get from the Lickitung just doesn't want to behave. Even there, that was a pretty clean arena. Still ended up losing about 4 seconds. just because of the placement of some enemies. What you see us doing in a lot of places too is save and quit manipulation. Saving and quitting puts us at the back of puts us back at the last door that we went through most of the time. There's a few choice areas that behave a little bit differently, but almost always it'll be the last door we were at, which is very helpful in dungeons that are usually pretty based around the opening area like that. So we'll use that in the first and third dungeons quite a lot. Here, we're getting an extra soul orb there by falling off, but it's another one that gets skipped by upper, so it's these little bits of time saved that the low strength route gathers pretty early on in the run before, after our third dungeon, it'll basically be the same route. Right here, we're going to show another place where we kind of abuse the isometric design of the game. We roll across corners and skip puzzles the way that they're intended, skip lighting a lot of those fire pits by just, rolling past and using one arrow to do all of that. Alright, this is going to be similar to the last arena. We're going to be fighting one more Lickitung with some edit enemies. However, this time, it is going to be some annoying mages that are going to get in our way. But thankfully the Lickitung is being kind and giving us a very nice pattern, and the mages both lined up right next to each other, so I was able to do one combo to defeat both of them. That is not usually the case for that arena. That's about as good as it can go. It's not going to gold, but it's going to come very close to it. It's those kind of minor things that can happen, which frequently comes down to RNG that can be the difference of saving 5 seconds and losing 5 seconds. The nice thing is there's just so many arenas that generally if you lose 5 seconds on one, you're going to save 5 seconds later. So the more often that we can save that time, the easier it is for us to save time throughout the run. But it also can go the other way. Just small mistakes at each one can snowball pretty greatly. But at the same time, it's 5 seconds here or there. Over the course of the run, it can add maybe a minute. At worst, in really bad conditions, generally not a problem. However, larger arenas and larger boss fights can pose more of a time risk because having to redo certain sections can come at quite a cost. And we're going to learn here with the first of our major arenas. So we've unlocked that door and we just got eaten by this mimic, and that's going to put us into an Avarice, which has some of the best music in the game. Avarices are intense arenas of 4 waves. There are always 4 waves, and we'll see that represented by some lit flames kind of in the background. And so the goal is to survive. It's going to throw everything it can at us, including enemies we've seen throughout the game. Now, sometimes it'll actually be enemies we haven't seen yet, because we're going to do the game a little bit out of order. But for now, it should all be familiar enemies. So, going into the third round already. Thankfully, no damage or anything, but it's usually the last round that's pretty dangerous. So while we are seeing the last round, which is going to throw as many enemies as it can at us, it's a good time to actually go over projectiles, because I've been hitting a lot of those throughout the game. I talked about how light attacks and heavy attacks have differences with strength, but projectiles function kind of similarly. Anytime you hit a projectile with a weapon, it's now going to do double the damage of whatever your attack was back at the enemy. So if you do it with a light attack, it's now worth basically 2 sword hits. If you do a heavy attack, it's now worth 4 sword hits. You can charge the heavy attack entirely until you hear a little ding, and that usually is 3 times damage. So if you deflect a projectile, it's now going to do 6 times damage if you can nail it with a fully charged heavy attack. We beat the Avarice, and we got our first award. No longer do we have to light our arrows on fire, we can just use fire. We've gotten the fireball spell, so what we're going to use that for is lighting braziers without having to find a fire pit nearby. It also does damage to enemies. We're not going to use it too much. There I miscalculated a little bit with the angle of the roll, fell off. Sometimes the isometricness can be at our detriment, but it is what it is. Thankfully, falling is not too detrimental. It does cost you 1 health, so a quarter of your health for most of the game, but it is what it is. So while we're walking to the next area, something to talk about there are the different ways to enter doors. Usually when you interact with the door, there's a cutscene of the protagonist walking through it, but it's kind of slow. What we found is that when you save and quit, you can get some early control with the bird before the door shuts. And so if you walk backwards into the door, you can usually input the interact button as soon as you are in the threshold of the door, and you get to actually enter it before the door shuts, and you skip the cutscene. We call that fast doors. Now, when you're approaching a door that's already shut, you can't do a fast door. You have to have it open. But if you charge up a heavy attack a little bit right at the front of the door, the protagonist moves forward enough that its hitbox actually enters that threshold. And so if you let go of that heavy attack and immediately buffer an input of the interact button, you go into the door. And we call those we call those usually charge doors. Quick doors, but that's a little confusing to have fast and quick doors. That's leg day, very cleverly named. He's going to bring us into our second area. Now you might be asking, hold on, why are we in the second area? We were just in the first area, we haven't even gotten the giant soul yet. We're going to come back for all of the second halves of the areas later. Our main goal is to get all of the upgrades first, because that's going to give us all of our mobility and all of our strength upgrades. The actual bosses we'll be fighting, funny enough, the third boss has the least amount of health. It's also the hardest of the three, so, you know, it's a good balance. And so the other two have more health than most things that we're going to fight in the game. So we also save them for last because of that, so we can get as much strength as possible. Here we're introduced to a mechanic similar to the mechanic we got in the estate, which foreshadowed our ability. There are these bomb plants that we're going to smack, and they're going to shoot these projectiles that explode on impact. So we're going to use that to break these cracked, glowing doors to advance through the area. And the grunts you see here with the green masks have more health than grunts we've dealt with already, which means that our sword is not going to do as much damage as it should. We're going to do a strength upgrade here in the near future that will keep us at a good place, though. So we're using these vines to climb up. We're going to abuse the isometricness there to roll onto that wall. All we're doing is skipping a camp that we're going to visit in a bit. But it saves time, and we like to save time. I think even the low strength route still utilizes that bomb arena to get that soul, because it's so quick, and you get the soul from beating the enemies too. So what we do is we go into our first forced arena of the area. 4 waves like most arenas, but sadly we don't get any bird souls, and we don't get any abilities out of this one. We just get to move on. We're going to use, anytime we can, the ability of a heavy deflect on these flower plants, because it's going to kill them in one shot if we can hit them with their own projectile. Once we get another strength upgrade, we can actually even kill them with just a light deflect because of how much more power we will have behind our sword. Alright, we've hit 1,000 soul. That's what we expect to be here, so throughout the entire run, we're going to be making sure we hit these soul thresholds to make sure we're not running behind. Yep, like I mentioned before, going to be a lot of places like this where it's just basically navigating through the areas, solving these puzzles, and good for donation reads and things like that. You might be wondering how I'm rolling through these walls and not getting damaged by the explosions. We definitely frequently manipulate the game's amazing iframe system. At the very beginning of the roll animation, there is iframes that prevent you from getting damaged by attacks, and so if we roll like right before rather, something's going to damage us, we can usually skip the damage, and that's what we're doing, rolling into the wall that's blowing up from the bomb that's hitting. We'll use that a lot more later in the game, especially during the first of the major bosses that we'll fight. For now, though, we're going to pick up this horn here. It's the only shiny object, which is a collectible in this game, that we need for any percent. It's the only forced shiny object for story progression. And we're going to use it basically right here. I talked about a camp that we skipped earlier, and this is it. This is the camp of the Forest Mother. This is the Forest Mother. We call her Mom. So this is Mom Camp, and she's going to play us a little tune here. It's a lovely moment to spam some saxophones in chat. is always nice for the streamers because we can stand up and take a drink and talk about how the run's going. And right after this, we're going to have a good example of fast doors. We're going to do a save and quit here, which is going to spawn us back at that door that we got at the beginning of the area. And we're going to walk back through that door before it has the ability to shut and interact with that white plane, and it'll bring us back to the Hall of Doors. All right. While we're going and doing another upgrade, one thing to mention that we do now with Death's Door that I didn't have at the time of this because it's that new is a text skipping addition. So there is an approved auto key program that we use to hold a key down to skip through dialogue only. We have it set to just the confirm key, which allows us to skip dialogue and nothing else. This game has a lot of button mashing, and it can get extremely exhausting in these hour-and-a-half to 2.5-hour categories. So we agreed as a community that there is a program which is set to roughly the speed of like a top button masher, just to really save everyone's hands. We were impressed by the way that Metroid Dread dealt with it, and you know, gamer health, hand health, all that kind of stuff is important. So we can or can't use that for the marathon, whatever's easiest. All of us are experienced in mashing with our hands. So with that being said, we are now in the actual dungeon itself, the only dungeon that's called a dungeon. This is the Mushroom Dungeon, and this is where I mentioned spiders are coming back. Spiders are such a pain because they can dodge whenever they want. They're really behaving right now. There's a reason this is my PB. But they love to jump away from you, which is quite annoying. The smaller spiders, which I call cowards, will hide if you get too close to them, but they'll shoot projectiles at you if you're far enough away from them. We'll deflect those into them quite a lot, although we won't see too many more of them throughout the run. In fact, that might have been the last ones for any percent. It's the first Crow Spirit. We're not going to save and quit in here. The dungeon's laid out in a way that it's actually quicker to just walk between the different areas. We're going to skip the puzzle the proper way by just making this very tight roll sequence there. The fires run out very quickly there, and you need to light both quick enough, or otherwise it extinguishes. Here's our heavy enemy of the dungeon. This is the Hammer Bro, as we call them. There is a quicker method to killing them than I'm doing here. Actually, I do it here kind of accidentally, which is approaching them from their right side, which allows us to damage them without hitting their shield, which we'll eventually have to deal with the shield, but it allows us to get some more damage in before breaking the shield. Spiders, again, really behaving. You'd love to see it. And that's our second bird soul down. We walked by a lot of these green pots. That's not something we worry about in any percent, but it is something for longer categories. That's the game's healing system. So we picked up exactly one seed so far, and we can plant the seed in the pot to create a flower there that we can use to regenerate all of our health once, basically per visit to an area. If we save and quit or we go back into the Hall of Doors, they all replenish themselves. So this arena, we're going to try and do the same thing, fight it from the right side so we can get a quick kill on it. Actually try to get a deflect on one of those fireballs to kill the plant a little bit faster, but it didn't quite work. There, we broke the shield instead of damaging it, so it's going to take a couple extra hits. Spider was very poorly timed when it tried to hit me, so I tried to dodge it, but then got hit by the Hammer Bro. That's life, you know, c'est la vie. There's a spider wanting to jump out of the way, but for the most part, they've all been very well behaved. Alright, there is 3 Crow Souls down, and now we're going into probably the worst of the dungeons. I feel like most people feel worst of the arenas out of the 12 Crow arenas that we'll go through, which we call the Water Arena or Hammer Bro Arena. It gets both names, where we're gonna fight a lot of Hammer Bros at the same time. Actually very surprised that I was bold enough to go into this arena with 2 health instead of using that pot there to heal, but healing does waste usually about 6 seconds. That's the nice thing about any percent though is we run by so many seeds and so many pots that there's so many safety strats that are available. So for marathon safety, we can pick up a couple very easy seeds that are along the way, just in like boxes we can break or take a couple side rolls. Like there's a seed right there on the other side of that wall, and then we can plant those pots. And it's not a crazy amount of time loss to take heals every now and then to avoid some costly deaths. Um, we probably wouldn't do that in a PB setting, but it's not going to lose much time in the course of the whole thing. Right. Get rid of all of them so that we can have the Hammer Bro spawn here. We want to deal with him quickly so we can try and fight all the rest of the Hammer Bros. The sooner we can deal with them, the sooner we don't have to worry about having to fight them on these bridges, because it's very easy to accidentally roll into the water, and you're already trying not to get hit by hammers, but it is what it is. So I feel like here at this point, yes, we had already changed the way that we collect soul, but in the past, we used to actually, if we get to 1 health here, because it's so common to get to 1 health here, we would roll into the water, take an intentional death during this cutscene, so that we would spawn back at the door here, not have to do a save and quit, and save a couple seconds on the next split. However, we don't do that anymore. All we do is take a quick pit stop here to get this soul, and save and quit back to the entrance. We also have the ability, instead of save and quitting, to go up and get another seed if necessary. However, this is just quicker, so we have a seed we'll collect on the way up here anyways. I'll usually either dodge or kill that mage in order not to get hit by its projectile as I roll up. But here we are, just gonna go right through that door. And just as before, we open the door, we're gonna come up here to claim our prize, and wouldn't you know it, it's another spooky box. Let's see if the protagonist feels a little bit more comfortable here. Nope, it's expecting it. It knows what's gonna happen. And we get chomped back up into our second of the addresses. Alright, so this one is going to have a couple enemies we haven't seen yet, like these slime monsters down in the lower half. That's because we skipped the whole area that the game usually expects us to go to, which is the lower half of the manor. Right there we had a stronger version of the archers. They're called elite archers. They fire arrows a lot faster. They're very annoying, but what we do is we just start that wave right in their face to make short work. There you saw a spider slightly troll me, but thankfully the rest of them are pretty well behaved. I spoke too soon. And then this is a nice wave for showing off deflex. Didn't quite get it with the green mage there. It's the first of the mages that we've seen. And thankfully, it also behaved. That green mage has a bad habit of spawning right in the path here of where the second mage is going to try and fire. And you end up hitting the green mage instead of the blue mage, and then you have to wait for the blue mage to spawn. It's annoying. Thankfully, it wanted to behave there. Generally, we're quick enough to deflect the green projectiles back into the green mage and kill it with its own toxic explosion. And our prize here is going to be pretty easy to guess. There's a lot of blowing up of walls. We're probably going to get a bomb upgrade. Bomb upgrades, bombs are great. They do 3 damage, which is more than what our sword does, but it's a long wind up and it takes 2 mana. So it has its downsides for sure. We use it for some combat, and we're actually finding more combat very frequently that can utilize it. Right now, it's mostly going to be used for solving puzzles and breaking exploding walls to get to new areas. We're making 2 quick, short detours to get 200 extra soul. That'll get us our next upgrade. This is a huge time save for the low strength route for upper, so he will be expanding his lead here if he's been able to keep up with the low strength arenas. We're gonna hit that one singular light pole that gives us mana just to farm it up for the next area. For the sake of not spoiling anything, I won't say why it gives us mana, but we can talk about it later. And we're back into the Lost Cemetery with one of the charge doors that I had mentioned before. We're now going to be going into the 3rd dungeon area. There's a quick safety seed if we need it right there, not too far out of the beaten path. But we want a PB in this run, so we're going to ignore it and keep on going. Alright. This is actually a place where we could use that fire pit right there at a certain angle to light it, but now that we have the fire ability, we're just going to lob it from across the map and light that brazier before we can even get to the ladder. The game does expect you to not enter these areas until you've gotten the previous abilities, so they kind of block a lot of stuff off by that, and you'll see actually a bomb wall we'll have to pass here in the near future. So while the game is Metrovania-like, there are still some pretty hard blocks. Even if you use that fire pit to kind of manipulate your way in here from the beginning of the game, you won't be able to get into this next dungeon early because you'll need the bomb ability. Similarly, you have to have the fire ability to get the um, into the ruins area we went to. Now, glitch categories, that's a different story, however, not for NMG. We're going to throw the bomb early there before we set foot onto this platform, because Barb, this NPC we briefly saw in Mom's camp, she has exactly one less text box if we blow up the wall before we approach. If we approach later, though, sadly, we have to read one extra text box, which is just a shame. We're gonna run right through this area, the Stranded Sailor area, and we're already in Castle Lockstone. Castle Lockstone being our third dungeon area. We are gonna follow the same pattern we've been doing for the last 40 minutes and be getting 4 more of these crow souls to advance to the next area. But first, Barb is going to give us a little bit of an idea of, the lore and the back story of the area. But that lore is slow. We're going to skip it. We're going to keep moving on. A fun thing that we'll see with the differentiating of strats here is how we go about this room. This is one of the rooms that has something that the community lovingly calls diagram strats. We have a runner in the community, Museus, who will frequently draw diagrams in MS Paint of different strats on how to solve these puzzles, and we kind of it's up to us to kind of try and dissect what he means by each diagram. So frequently they save a lot of time, but usually we have to figure out exactly how he's found a way around it. That was not a diagram strat. I did the room pretty much normally there. There's a strat in that room. It's just very dangerous to mess it up. You lose a lot of time. And there, I sadly goofed up twice. Did not read the timing of any of those enemies. So I got a nice arrow to the face as well as a smack from the halberd, which is our community name for the big grunts that have the spears. They operate on a pretty consistent cycle, so if you can get the rhythm of their attacks, it's pretty easy to do a lot of damage in between. Another place I'm a little surprised I continue on. Usually we save and quit there for damaged to get the full heal and spawn at that door. Thankfully, this next arena, there's a couple waves that where you don't have to worry about too much. This is one of the more fun arenas to do in the game, and it looks really flashy. It's one of the few places where you'll see us utilize bombs. We gotta make a quick pit stop first, light this brazier here. I have really bad aim, so I missed it twice. And we're gonna quickly roll and get that interact with the ladder before this cutscene triggers. We sadly have to sit through all of these cutscenes as we light those 4 braziers. We won't worry about the other 3 until later. But for now, what we're gonna do is continue on with our bird collection here, and we're gonna throw a bomb there, get a nice deflect, and finish off the job. However, I sadly missed this I missed the deflect, which meant I missed damaging the mage and had to wait for the spawn. Thankfully it didn't spawn over the pit, so I was able to finish the mage off with a heavy attack and didn't have to deflect. Oh wow, I really did not do well with this arena in this. I almost died. That's crazy. Ooh, I am not playing this safe. I wanted this PB. There's definitely safer ways to do these arenas to prevent ourselves from dying. Deaths are pretty costly in this game, but they rarely total more than a minute of time loss. And honestly, for all 3 top runners, like at worst, we're gonna die once, and that's like fairly seldom at this point. Because even in situations like this, if I'm down to 1 health and I'm in a marathon setting, I know very safe strats to beat those arenas. A little slower than usual, but a lot faster than dying. So we're gonna pull that lever, save and quit, to skip the lever cutscene and also to be closer to it down on the bottom floor. and move on to the next Crow Sword. Crow Soul, rather. This has a nice little puzzle skip strat, one of those diagram strats I mentioned, most likely. Yeah, we're gonna utilize these angles to hit a couple of those switches from a distance to skip to the next area. It's nice because this puzzle in this room, you do have to have a certain amount of mana, but because we're able to still hit a couple of the switches in the last room, instead of use arrows, um, I'm able to have enough for that puzzle. And into the third arena, which we call the Theodore Arena. The big statue in the background is of a Lord of Doors named Theodore, which is just such a good name. Uh, good, good, good door pun. I get really annoyed by some spiders in this one who like to jump behind the statue. So that was the revenge of the spiders from a very kind mushroom dungeon. And you'll love to see it one heavy attack take out all three enemies. So I can still somewhat keep time here on a dungeon on a arena that did not necessarily go my way. So I could have lost a lot more time if I didn't have that clean of an ending. Similar to the last one, the last soul we got, we're not going to save and quit immediately. What we're going to do is run over here to get a key, unlock a key over here. That'll give us access to the last area. I don't have any health lost here, so it's actually quicker, both RTA and a little bit faster with our loadless timer that we utilize usually, to just run between the two. We used to save and quit, but it actually ends up being faster just to quickly hike it. However, if we're low on health or low on mana, because we specifically want 2 mana to start this arena off, the save and quit is better. We're going to do some more bomb strats right at the beginning so we can get some quick kills here. And if we're fast enough, this deflect will kill both enemies, which is extremely satisfying and looks very flashy. It's one of my favorite strats we have in the game. Similarly, we're going to try and damage these enemies as often as we can, hitting multiple at the same time. They don't always want to behave that way, but when we can get them to, we're going to take advantage every time. So, always one hit away when they want to hit at you. It is what it is. With that being said, that is our last of the 12 Crow Souls that we'll have to collect throughout the main game. That's going to open up our third, spoiler alert, Avarice. Just like the other ones, there's an Avarice hidden behind this, so we'll be jumping into that now. Alright. This is the only area that really doesn't hint at any next ability. However, eagle-eyed viewers will probably notice a significant amount of giant anchors that look very linkable too. Like they seem in a place where you could probably aim at them pretty well. So and there's a couple that we walked past in the castle as well. So that's the only real hint that they give toward the final ability in the game we'll get from this Avarice. Which also is probably the most difficult. It's actually going to open with a unique enemy that we'll only see once in the game. A red mage. We're going to beat it up before it can show us what it does, but what it does is cast Wall of Fire, which is very annoying, and can really put a damper on an Avarice if you let it spawn in. But we'll make quick work of it, as well as these boomers, canonically the name that they have from the developers. These big giant grunts with boomerang heads that jump around. Sometimes it's very hard to predict where they're going to land. But we're going to try and use as many projectiles as we can to beat both them and the mages at the same time. These Grimers, being jerks, you can see how they attack you there. And then another unique enemy that there's actually quite a few in the game, we're only going to see a few here, are these giant knights that we call Smoes, named after the Dark Souls boss. But we use a strat of hiding behind their left side, which tricks the AI. It is frame rate dependent, so that is something that we would probably test day up. There's definitely strats that, backup strats that we can utilize, but it is frame rate and VSync dependent, but most computers can handle it. But it allows you to still fight them and not have to worry about them destroying you. And with that, we get a hookshot ability. We're going to immediately celebrate by falling off the edge 4 times and dying. This is, I mentioned we all might die once. That's not counting this. This is the only intentional death that we'll take in the run, because for some reason, after the Avarice, if you successfully beat it, your spawn point is still the last door that you took, which in this case is Castle Lockstone's door. So we're going to use that to quickly work back. We now have all of the abilities, so now it's time to make a reverse gauntlet back through all of the second halves of the dungeons. Each dungeon has a second half and then like an area after the dungeon that is more difficult. And so the second half of the castle is pretty long. The second half of the fortress, well, it's called fortress, of the ruins in the Mushroom Dungeon, the Frog King's domain, is more. They're all kind of platform heavy, and then they all feature a last area is very combat heavy generally. So we'll do this. We'll save and quit. We're trying to abuse the game a little bit by getting some early control. After saving and quitting from that, we can move a little bit here if we put our inputs in well enough. There we go. Before we're forced into watching this cutscene. Since we save and quit, the fire's already lit. Usually you watch the fire light like we did with the first brazier, but nope, we just get to see the blank cutscene anyways. It's going to be really funny for the fourth one because usually you see an elevator come up from there, but instead we're just going to watch the already spawned elevator just sit there for about 13 long seconds. And here we are using our hookshot some more. It's a very fun ability. We'll use mouse a certain few times in the game because it helps us get some tighter angles. It's not necessary to use mouse for those, but I find it more consistent, so I end up using it. We'll also use it like that sometimes to cut some corners and do some puzzles a little bit quicker than intended. This is a good example of that too. We'll shoot an arrow there, ride this up, and we'll roll right on over to that pillar. Again, we're using that isometric funness here. This room's actually the reason why we eventually decided that it's okay to shoot through walls, is because these walls, which look like they have little windows, you can hookshot through, you can throw bombs through, you can shoot fire through, arrows, and so it no longer felt like a major glitch because, I mean, anything except for the actual crow itself can pass through those walls. And it makes going through this puzzle a lot of fun because you can just fly through. There's so many different ways of solving it, some with arrows, some with hookshot, a mixture of the two. One of the more fun areas, if you don't mess it up, because messing it up costs you a lot of time. Right, this is our last of the 4, and we'll save and quit again. Hopefully we get some early movement again coming out of this loading. There we are. We even got 2 rolls. Let's go. And there's the elevator. Usually the ground opens up and the elevator slowly comes up out of that little slot there, allowing us to head up to the top area of the castle, which is really just the exit of the castle. So, all right. It's gonna be another one of those places where it'll just be really good for a couple donations. We're just gonna be running to the next area. This higher strength route gets that soul, but the lower strength one will skip it. Even though it's a pretty quick one. It's not really necessary at this point for the lower soul strat. Just like our buddy Leg Day we met earlier, there's a few grunts here that, if we're lucky enough, will prove themselves to be Arm Day. Hopefully we see one of those in this run. Since it's been about a month, I don't remember if I actually get an Arm Day or not here. Not lucky enough. Between the 3 runs in the raise, I imagine we'll get at least one of them. I'd be shocked if we don't get at least one. Alright. This is the camp of the Free Crows. A short little interlude area we get to before the last area of the mountain. And this is a big lore dump. Some NPCs we've seen quite a few times throughout the run if you're playing it casually. We have not talked to them once in the speedrun, so this is the only time we do, one of 2 times that we'll speak to Vaga. We're just gonna get a key from him and just keep trucking on. Our goal is to get the credits after all as fast as possible. We get one more elevator ride until we get to my favorite track of the game and one of my favorite areas. It's a very scary area, but it's a lot of fun. It is the old watchtowers. Alright. This is an area that has the highest potential of deaths. It is a big run killer, but also the design of this area is extremely linear once you've gone through it. It's very, you snake through the area and go to a lot of different side areas. However, as you go through, you will find places where you can opt to unlock shortcuts back to where you're at. So in this run, I'm going to opt to skip all of them because they do lose about 4 seconds per shortcut at least. And we are trying to go fast, but in a marathon setting, I'll show you where they're at. They will make deaths in this area significantly less costly because you won't have to walk all the way around, which is why usually if you die in this area in a full speed run, it's a reset because you're going to be losing probably like 2 minutes walking around this area again. So instead, we're just going to be zipping through all these enemies. Hookshotting to these enemies doesn't actually damage them, but it allows us to damage them as we come back. I'll let the laser finish off that hammer bro, you know, a couple less hits that I have to deal with. We're going up here and dealing with some boomers. Sometimes we can manipulate them just like this, so we can do a lot of damage to both of them at the same time. Like I mentioned before, that's frequently a strat we strive for as much as possible. That right there, that lever, will open the gate that we just walked by. We're skipping it here, but that allows us to skip everything we've done so far up to this section. We're going to abuse the physics of that roof to roll up there, and then hook shot just to the left of this anchor, which lets us skip that gate. In a moment, we're going to get one more lever that'll open up all of those gates as well. So we'll just walk in a straight line back to the ending, again, if something goes wrong, if we take an unfortunate death. We've already walked by 2 flower pots, so even if we were unlucky enough to take some damage here, there's been plenty of places where we've been able to save, and if we get to one of those safety levers with some damage, it's also a pretty good place to be able to save, because you can just walk back to where the lever was to get where you were, and it doesn't lose that much time, especially compared to actually dying. It is optional to kill these mages I'm killing, because one thing we haven't talked about is the leashes on enemies. They don't exist. If an enemy has the capability of following you, it will follow you. So grunts, if you get too far out of their eye line, or if you like drop off something or hook shot away from them, they'll stop because they can't physically follow you anymore. That's not a limit that mages have. Mages will follow you until you basically leave an area for another area. They are stubborn jerks. So this is the ice arena. You've noticed every gamer's favorite, thing in any video game, ice physics here. So the ice arena combines both the combat and also ice physics. It is probably the biggest run killer because it's so easy to take a death here from enemies just wanting to be jerks. What we'll try and do here is not let them just jump and fall down, so now we're screwed by having one enemy all the way down there. What we're going to want to do is kill him, get back up here quickly, because there is a manipulation if you can kill this hammer bro quick enough. I am not going to get it because I took damage. Usually you can hook shot back up to the archers there, skip having to wait for this hammer bro to somehow hit you that far away. But usually you can kill him up top like here, and that allows you to finish the arena so close to the end of it. I pretty much saved it by still killing that last archer there, but ended up still losing time, and we can see that reflected in my split. Lost about 9 seconds to gold, and honestly, I probably have a bigger gold for that, because that was a newer strat found about a month ago. So right when I got this PB, that was probably one of the first times I did that. So that's actually going to be probably faster by the time that GDQ comes around. And here's our first of the major giant soul fights. This is Betty. Betty the Yeti. She is the biggest pain point for new runners. I almost quit this game because of Betty, because she is a very hard fight casually, and she has a very consistent way of defeating her, and it's this. I'm living in her belly button. abusing the iframe rolls that you get, the iframes you get from rolls, to do a lot of these roll slashes, sometimes a little too early and taking damage. And if you're consistent enough, this is her third phase, and I'm going to finish her off right here. Her second phase is her roll phase, where she'll roll across the map at you. Easy to take damage, and it wastes a lot of time, and it's hard to damage her during it. So if we can do enough damage until she gets to the part where she would normally trigger her roll phase, we just skip it to the last phase where she has her tantrum with the snowballs. So I still got the fastest cycle, but I took damage, so it was a little slow, so I still ended up losing time in general to that. Save and quit there just to save a bit of time walking around and also give us the ability to get this fast door. Lots of people are always like, is it really faster to save and quit than walk around? Yes, we timed it many times. It is much faster. We're going to have a story break real quick. Instead of going back to the Hall of Doors like we expected, once we've got our first giant soul, regardless of who it is, we get to meet our boss. This is the Lord of Doors. They're the world's best boss, as you can see here. And for some reason, we got teleported to their domain, and they're just as confused as we are. They're like, what are you doing here? Oh, you got a giant soul? Ah, interesting. Huh, proud of us. We'll take it. Apparently, they're happy that we were able to do that. And now they say, get out of my area. Go back to work. Although something seems a little off. Again, I'll let the story be something that the viewers can learn on their own if they end up playing the game. This is another nice cutscene as soon as the snap happens and you get sent through the door. A moment to breathe, drink some water, talk to chat, read some donations, and head on out to the next area. So now we're going back to the Frog King's domain. We're going to jump back to the Overgrown Ruins. We're going to use a shortcut to get to the fortress a lot faster than usual. So hookshot through some enemies. Another reason why we love having hookshot here. So is quicker movement for things like this. We're gonna walk around in this room, but there's been faster strats discovered. They're a little sketchy, but you know, they work. So save a couple seconds in that room nowadays. And just like that, we're in Mushroom Dungeon, and just like that, we're outside of Mushroom Dungeon. It's a pretty nice shortcut. And it gets us 200 soul along the way, which is going to be very nice for us getting the 1500 required for the last upgrade that we'll get. Oh, last major upgrade. We'll fit a couple more in the very close to the end game. In the end game, really. So Flooded Fortress is all movement based. Some puzzles here. There's really like one enemy we may have to fight if we want to get a seed. So it's easy to fall in the water here. Crows are not water birds, so we take damage in the water. We will take quite a few of these corners pretty tightly, just because it's quicker movement, but that comes with the risk of getting damaged. There's not any really consistent pots that we can use to heal, so if I had fallen in the water there, that means I'm going through the second half of this area with lower health, which, there we go. Just like that, I fell in there. Hookshotting is great because you can actually hookshot to most interactable things, like that switch, which usually you smack or shoot an arrow at to trigger. You can also hookshot to it, which helps with some fast movement. Quickly make a detour up here. We got a lever we got to pull to skip to the next area. This is a good time to talk about any percent glitched any percent, which is what was run pretty early on in the game's history at AGDQ 2022. The game was only about 6 months old. We got the unrestricted category in, and there's a lot of the cool abilities from that we don't do here because they're very big glitches. The zoomies, which is a pause mechanic with daggers that lets you fly across the area pretty quickly, as well as something called arcs, where basically we do a ground pound kind of animation to cancel a roll to allow us to do another roll, and it lets us skip over gaps where we usually shouldn't be able to move over, and lets us kind of do a lot of things out of order. So the nice thing, really cool thing about any percent NMG is it's an entirely different run. It's so unique. It's about 25 minutes slower, but it's so much more fun. This is a dangerous strat where we ignore all those enemies and try and kind of run around to hookshot there instead of killing them, and we usually will try and bait some of these enemies to get some other hook shots. I bail on it because of low health and because there's a lot of time to be lost there, but sometimes we can hook shot to skip this area entirely, but that all depends on if that elite archer wants to behave. In the past, we had a very RNG dependent trick that we did in that section we just passed. We've skipped it since, and we now go through this area to do a significantly less RNG dependent trick. It is technically slightly slower. If we were able to get the RNG dependent trick first try, it's faster than what we do here. I want to make it as nerve-wracking as possible, but we shoot an arrow through this little gap there to hit that switch to get to the end area and skip about half of Flooded Fortress. You'll see that I'm still going to get plagued by these mages that I did not finish off in the previous area. So this is an example of a time where I would try usually to kill them along the path, so I don't have to fight them here. But because they're not a required enemy for this forced arena, I can actually let them live the whole time. I can finish this arena and actually still have that mage alive. So I actually don't remember if I finish it off or not here. So we'll see. So far it's not looking likely because I'm about to finish the arena. And yeah, apparently I let it live the whole time. And it took away my auto aim, so I didn't hit the switch that I wanted to hit. Nice thing is I'm not losing that much time to my gold here, so even with those mistakes and how much damage I took, I was not too far behind. And with that, we get into our third fight. Again, this is one I would absolutely save and quit before, so I would have full health. This is the Frog King. Has amazing dialogue, this incredible intro. I guarantee you anyone that we get on couch comms would love to read this out as fast as possible. I bet you we can convince them to do it. That'd be a really fun donation incentive because of how long that title is. I know I've done it in a few marathons for this category. What we're going to do here is a very, very tight trick called Armor Break, in which we hit the Frog King 3 times as fast as possible to get to the second phase of the fight. Usually, you have to wait through 3 cycles of him popping out and bouncing on his mace, and after he finishes bouncing on his mace, we run behind him and smack him. But right at the start of the fight, we quickly run behind and smack him once, and as soon as he spawns out, we hit him twice. But it is dependent on hitting him in the air, which is pretty tricky, actually. We Dodongo him there. We throw a bomb in his mouth, which makes him pass out for a second, which allows us to push a lot of damage in. We're maximizing damage as much as possible, so we're actually shooting fireballs in this section before it turns around, because fireballs frequently do 2 hits as they pass through his hitbox. So 4 fireballs does 8 damage, which is absolutely worth it. And quick kill. So we always want to try and beat him in the middle of his phase there when he's shooting the bombs on the upper side of the arena. With higher strength upgrades, which is possible in some of the other categories, we can beat him basically right when he starts that section of the phase. But with strength 4, usually he gets a couple bombs off before you beat him. Just like that, we're 2 of the 3 giant souls in our reverse boss order run. And we're going to go back to the area that started it all. We're going back to the estate and the manor that we were at 14 minutes into the run. But first, we got a pit stop we would normally make here. But I remember I just ran right on through. Usually here, we would get Strength 5 and Dex 1. I forgot in my PB. So I'm going to do this entire area with less strength and 2 very hard bosses with less strength than I should have. The dexterity upgrade that we get here, because we have extra soul, it's nice. It means your combo's a little bit faster, and generally your rolls and your movement can be a little bit quicker. But it's very much not important to be missing that one. The strength is the bigger miss here. Hookshot is so important in this area. If you do this area like in the developer intended way right after you get Fireball, you don't have the ability to hookshot through all these, including this super fun swag strat. Shoot some arrows, push this bull cart. Not only does it look fun, it is legitimately faster. And we just hookshot and skip so many things throughout this entire area, um, because we come back to it later. So that alone by itself is almost worth the reason to fight Grandma at last. The other reason being fighting Grandma on strength 2 or fighting Grandma on strength 5. We'd rather fight her when we're doing 2 damage per slash instead of 1.4 damage per slash. There she is. She's kidnapped our friend Pothead. What a jerk. So we're gonna go back and rescue our boo. So just like that, that was the movement section, and now we're getting into the more combat section. Grandma's section here, the inner furnace, the last section, is a little bit different than the other ones. It really only has one forced combat section. There's a lot of enemies and there's a lot of combat opportunities, but the way it's designed, we absolutely can move through it very fast. This area is very interesting because the music is queued up to the motion of these pistons, so it moves with the beat. And there's some theorized crafting that's been going on saying that, you know, there's potential to do some pause buffers to manipulate where the beat is to make sure that you can get some earlier cycles from some of these platforms. Nothing that's been tested out too well yet, but it's some real fun stuff that we've been talking about recently, and potentially by the time that this goes live with GDQ, it'll be ready. Like, for example, there, potential to pause the music so that the beat hit in the pause screen, so that we could have made that platform instead of having to wait for the platform to lower down. But alas, we still moved pretty darn quick through this area. That was the only forced arena that we just went through. We have to do it to continue on. I forgot I did that. But we can run past every other enemy basically for the rest of the inner furnace. What we can't run past are all of these furnace little puzzles. Those furnaces are a lot harder to hit than you would think with fireballs. They've got very small windows. I've been very lucky to hit them every single time. We'll call it skill, but in a lot of cases it feels like luck. I forgot to switch to fire there, so that also is not going to help. But yeah, we're definitely making good use of the hook shot. I'd probably push my luck here and try and make the cycle. Nope, I called it. That's a very tight cycle you could make, but considering how slow I was to start it, I didn't think I was going to make that, so good judgment call. A couple other enemies that we can hook shot here, and get to this area, which usually we have a long section that we run around avoiding or fighting enemies, but we're going to use the angles here to just skip that entire platform and all of those enemies into the next area. With 4 magic, there's a strat here that's pretty dangerous that we can go for, but there's a significant amount of time loss if we miss it. We can shoot these fireballs at this angle to try and light those, but like I said, the angle is very short, and if you run out of mana on that moving platform, you either have to run against the current, essentially, or fall off and take a damage, but I don't want to do either of those. I barely missed that cycle of getting on there, the fast cycle, but it's alright. It gave me a chance to get some more mana for the second part. So this room I did it basically the slowest I could because of the cycles, but at most that loses 4 seconds, so. And a run where it's pretty consistent for all of the runners to get sub 1 hour 20 times. The time losses could push us back into the 122 maybe with a really bad run. And this is, we're talking loadless real-time attack. So straight up loads counting time, probably like a 130 would be a safe estimate, 128, 130. We will likely be much below, like far below it, but that's a safe one to say with like 2 bad deaths and some bad arenas and things like that. So Grandma, she likes to teleport around and throw pots at us. The green pots will throw projectiles and the purple pots explode on impact. Whenever we can, we try and get her to damage herself with the purple pots. There's a really good example of it coming up here. And then certain times we'll be able to damage herself with the green ones by deflecting it. But this time we were not so lucky. Here she's going to get into her pot, bounce around a little bit, and shoot some fireballs at us. I probably would have killed her at this point if I had strength 4. In fact, I'm probably really confused right now why she has so much health, and it really comes down to I goofed. So I lost 8 seconds from my gold, 8.5 seconds for my gold because of that. Because that was still a pretty good fight. I only took, what, 1 damage? But I just was doing less damage per hit. I don't know what made me forget to get it, but I did. I won't do that during the run, that's for sure. And that's our last of the Giant Souls. We were quested with getting 3. We have those 3, so now we're going to go back to the crow who started this all, the gray crow, back in the Lost Cemetery, that first area, second area really, we went to after the grove. I had my sneaking suspicion at this point that I forgot an upgrade, but I didn't want to go to Darwin because I didn't want to lose time. It was definitely a choice for me to make because we're coming up to one of the hardest bosses in the entire game. Uh, and I recognize that I'm gonna have to fight it on 4 strength, which is definitely gonna be a detriment. Now, about 7 minutes into the game, we pulled a lever here and used that sewer. The real reason we did that is so that we had this path open right here, which makes the walk back up here much quicker. That's a path that the low strength route does not get, so they actually have to walk around a little bit further and a little bit more out of the way to get here. So it's another place where there's a little bit of catch up that has to be done from a low strength runner. The hope is that skipping all the other things has net you enough time save that you're still ahead of this one. And there they are, the 3 giant souls. We're going to feed them into this door, which is the titular door, this death's door. So throw some souls in there, and hopefully what it is enough soul to bust the door down. And there it is. Alright. Bit of a spoiler coming up here, but we're gonna see what's beyond the door. I mean, it's a speed run. You're always gonna get spoiled for the end game if you watch a speed run, so there's only so much we can do. But we've made it to the other side, and we're gonna find out what is there. Hey, look. It's death. That's a cute thing I always like to point out. Death there, white background, black text. It's the reverse of if you die in the game. If you actually take a death, black background with clear white text that you can see through. So it's kind of cool that like you're on the other side of the door, you're seeing death in person, and you're seeing it the opposite of how you usually see it if you actually die. But it's a cute little thing that the developers did there. I like it. Here, Death is regaling us with a story of why he's here, giving us a nice little background on some of the lore of the game and talking about the Lord of Doors, multiple of them, and different problems and things like that. So what he's letting us know is once souls are here, they're gone for good, which is not good news for our pal, the Grey Crow here, because he really wanted to get a soul back that was in here, and now he can't. And he's been around for a long time, and he's probably a giant soul. So now we have to fight this jerk. Thankfully, the soundtrack is wonderful for it. What we saw there is the murderlings, and I'm really getting bullied by them. Every time that we hit the Grey Crow, he spawns these murderlings that are homing projectiles that come after us. We can deflect them, and just like other deflects, it does that double damage. So our goal is to try and get as many of those deflected into him as possible. He has his own hook shot ability, which really begs the question, why didn't he get all of these giant souls? Why did he make us do it? I am playing this very dangerous because I know how ahead I am of my goal, but this is a very scary point in the fight. There's so many ways I can die, and I have such low health here. 2 of the damage I've taken so far has been the reason why we hate murderlings, which is they can just basically randomly spawn and kill you upon spawn. But there we go. I beat him. Lost a really painful 17 seconds beating him, but hey, it's better than dying. So, now we've freed Death. He is free of the other side, but he still has one last task for us to do. That is, go have a meeting with our boss. The time has come. You see, one interesting thing about Death's Door is it's down with the bureaucracy. All the other crows are like, it's time to unionize. It's a very topical thing. Now everyone's talking about how, hey, things have been a little suspect for a while. So here's our last chance to do upgrades. We do it during the cutscene by rolling and talking to him before this happens. That's where I realized, hey, that's why I've been so unbelievably underpowered this whole time. I didn't have strength 5. Now I have all the upgrades I'm supposed to have as I go into the end game. We've got 2 sections left. One more section that is movement intensive, and one last combat. The first section we're going to go through, it's combat based as well. We call it the gauntlet. It's this section right here, and it's pretty punishing if you take a death. So there's a lot of safety strats that we can try and take, but there's a lot of really cool swag strats that are there too. So it's going to be a balance of like, when do we take the swag strat and when do we take the safety strat. So there's going to be many sections here where we fight the Lord of Doors and see how much we can damage them. Thankfully, they take the same damage in each section. 12 starting off in this section, 12 hits, and then 15 hits in each next section of it. But in between the combat sections with the Lord of Doors, we have these kind of run and gun sections where we are sprinting through these areas, avoiding these door bulls, and hookshotting, just some fun platforming. Door bulls function a lot like other things in the game that can harm you. You can roll right through their hitbox if you time it well enough and not take damage. We also have the ability, like I'm going to try here, to get on that wall. I almost made it. And that's going to let us manipulate something that we'll see after this next arena, something that we call instant doors. So every time that the Lord of Doors snaps like that and spawns the door to the next section, what we can do is basically ignore that it's waiting for it to land and stand right in the spot where it spawns. So the moment he snaps and that door spawns, we just skip it. We skip the animation and instantly go through to the next section. That was a good example of me rolling through that door bowl because I missed the hook shot. Good little backup that we had there. Rolling along the edges of those buses guarantees we're not going to get hit. And into the second bit of combat. A nice thing we discovered recently, just moves it a little bit quicker, is we kind of skirt around its attacks by doing these heavy attacks that push us just out of the hit range, so we can kind of go through, since that does 4 damage, we can go through those combat scenarios faster than if we were just keeping it with only light attacks. So it speeds it up a little bit too. And what it does is give us a lot more consistency in this last arena with skipping the really annoying final attack that the Lord of Doors can do here. So if we're good with our combos, we can have him snap right here. Great. Otherwise, he does the Betty rolls. So those annoying Betty rolls I mentioned before, if we're really good, which I think the 3 of us are pretty darn good, we're never going to see a roll up across any of our screens. But, you know, we might see them. They're annoying, but they're something we can deal with. And just like that, we are done with the gauntlet. And here we are at the end of the game, coming up against our boss, the Lord of Doors, for the final time. It looks real familiar, just like the start of the game. We spawned down where the bus dropped us off. So, like all good things, comes down to the beginning at the end. And it's time to have a quick conversation with the world's best boss. He's not ready to go, though. He doesn't want to be like his predecessors, so he's going to suck up all of the soul that we've collected throughout the game and feed it into himself to become one last big chunkus that we have to take down. So, final combat, pretty consistent, still pretty difficult. There's some phases and some attacks that he can pull out of nowhere that can be very annoying. But as long as he wants to have any, bit of consistency with his attack patterns, we can usually feed a lot of damage in between the phases to him. These backhands, for example, once he starts them, if you can consistently get behind him, you can feed him, you can make sure that he continuously does backhands, at least 3 of them in a row. So get him stuck in a pattern to do, there we go, so again behind him, and we get all that damage in before he goes to the next phase. We manipulate this laser by rolling into it there, so we don't have to. Usually we would take damage, and the moment you take damage, the laser goes away. What we choose to do is roll into it, so we use the iframes to not get damaged and still get rid of the laser. And just like that, we beat him up we finished him, and that was time. Time is the moment that the screen flashes when we beat him, because that's the end of the game. Here we are. We just have a couple text box. I think I was excitedly screenshotting my time because I was like, oh, I finally got a sub 1 hour 20 minute run, and yeah, there's just a little bit more
It
dialogue
is
here.
done.
And there we go.
I
There's me
have done
talking.
it.
There we go. So there's a little bit more that goes on, but it's mostly just credits and more lore stuff. So this definitely doesn't need to be shown because time happens at that last hit. So we might just unhabit mash through this, especially me, because all of the longer categories still have at least 20 minutes after this. So it is what it is. But yes, that's Death's Door. It's a really fun game. There's been so much interest in the NMG categories, especially any percent. For a while, we were doing weekly, bi-weekly, sometimes nightly races of a couple of us going together. There was a really fun tournament that was organized by Pudding Boxes, who I mentioned earlier in the summer for any percent NMG that had a lot of interest. It was a lot of fun. It pushed quite a lot of people to big PBs. So it's a category that I feel like is always growing. We're still changing it a lot. Right now, world records of 115, and I fully suspect 115.40. By the time AGDQ 2023 rolls around, I imagine there'll be at least one more world record by then, because that 115.40 has stood for quite a while. I think it was shortly after the tournament. Let's see, it was, yeah, July 9th. So people have been catching up slowly and steadily. So I imagine that'll topple by one of the three of us, hopefully, by the time in this race, by the time that the actual race would occur. Yeah, I appreciate you considering me for AGDQ. You can find me at twitch.tv/keypoints. I regularly run this longer categories, but also any percent, especially if the community is doing like a weekly any percent run or race. I usually jump on those because they're just so much fun. Um, and yeah, thank you again for considering it. Hopefully, I'll be seeing you all digitally in a few more months. Thank you.